Hi, I'm Jackie Knowles of Glasswork Pixie, partnering with Oceanside Glass and Tile to bring you this instructional Fusing Fundamentals video series. And you've made it all the way to the last lesson. In this one, we'll use the skills we learned in lessons 1 through 8 to create this simple project that I call the fishbowl. This is a design I created specifically for this series because it involves 3 different types of fuses, it incorporates various accessory glasses, and it will turn out beautifully regardless of your skill level. If you're watching this on my website, glassworkpixie.com, or at oceansidecompatible.com, you'll find a downloadable file there that walks through every step of this project and includes a printable pattern so you can easily follow along. But remember, glass fusing is all about expressing your creativity, so feel free to tweak the pattern and really make it your own. You can substitute different glass colors, change the size or number of the fish, and even change the shape of the bowl to fit a different mold. It's all up to you. Alright, let's start creating. First, let's make sure we have everything we need. The glasses used in this project are a sheet of Oceanside compatible dark blue white wispy, light blue white wispy, pale blue white wispy, and clear white, all to make the base layer strips. Crystal clear to make the clear cap, sunflower opal and orange opal to make the fish, a turquoise blue opal noodle to make the accent lines, coarse crystal clear frit, or just scraps from the crystal clear sheet used for the cap, to make the bubbles, and just the tiniest little shards of black opal for the fish eyes. If you want to swap out any of these glasses for other colors or types, go for it. Just remember that as we learned in Lesson 3, all the glass used in a single fusing project must be compatible. The tools and supplies we'll need to create this project are a printout of the pattern and a printout of the separate pattern pieces, a kiln shelf, kiln wash or several pieces of shelf paper, a bowl slumping mold at least 5.5 inches in diameter, scissors, a marker, a ruler, a glass cutter, running pliers, grozing pliers, a glass grinder or an abrading stone, several clean cloths, a cleaning agent like isopropyl alcohol or soap and water, and a scraper or scrubbing pad. A pair of tweezers and some kiln glue will also come in handy, though they're not absolutely required. The safety gear we'll need to use as we work on this project are goggles to wear while cutting glass, and gloves along with the NIOSH-approved respirator with particulate filters to wear while applying powdered kiln wash and while removing fired kiln wash or fired shelf paper. Now that we have everything we need, let's start with step 1, preparing the kiln shelf and slumping mold. Follow the steps we learned in Lesson 7 to either apply kiln wash or shelf paper to both your shelf and your mold. If you're using paper, the first shelf firing will only require a small square of about 4 by 4 inches. If you're using kiln wash, kiln dry your shelf first, followed by your mold second, since we'll be using the shelf first. Now let's go to step 2, preparing the pattern. Grab your copies of the full pattern and the separate pieces. I've chosen to laminate mine, but this isn't a necessity. The full pattern can be taped to your work surface so you can build the project on top of it. Use the other pattern template to cut out the individual shapes of the base layer strips, the fish body, and the cap. Note that pieces 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and 8 and 9 are mirror images of each other, so you only need 1 pattern cutout per each of those pairs. Also note that we're going to be using small glass scraps for the fish fins, so you don't need to worry about cutting out the pieces for those really tiny bits. Set these pieces aside once they're all cut out. Step 3 is to make the bubbles. If your kiln shelf is ready, you can start making them now. If you're still waiting for it to fire, you can move on to step 4 and then come back here to step 3 when it's done. To make the bubbles, Scatter some of the clear frit onto the kiln shelf. The pattern requires 16 bubbles, but you'll probably want several to choose from, so I'd recommend adding some extra. The grains don't have to be positioned far apart, but make sure they're not touching. And if you don't have pre-made frit, you can use your grozing pliers to nibble off chunks of your clear glass sheet to create your own frit particles. Once they're positioned on the shelf, bring the frit pieces up to a full fuse to form them into perfect little circles, a process we learned about back in Lesson 4. You can move on to the next project steps while you wait for your bubbles to form, but once they're fired, remove them from the shelf and set them aside. Then, clean and re-prime your kiln shelf, since we'll use it to fire the base layer next. If you're using shelf paper, you'll need a large enough piece of paper to fit the entire project, a square of about 6 by 6 inches. Next is step 4, making the bowl base. This step entails cutting out the strips and the cap from sheet glass using their corresponding pattern pieces. Piece numbers 1 and 2 are cut from clear white sheet glass. Piece numbers 3 and 4 are cut from pale blue white wispy. Piece numbers 5 and 6 are cut from light blue white wispy. Piece number 7 is cut from dark blue white wispy. And piece number 10 is cut from crystal clear. The order and technique of exactly how you cut these shapes is up to you. I like to work with one color at a time, first tracing the pattern template edges, and then using a ruler to mark full strips of the necessary width. I score the glass along this straight line, then use my running pliers to break off the long strips. Finally, I use a combination of my running pliers and grozing pliers to break away the smaller pieces. Once all the glass is cut, it might have to be refined, depending on how closely your cuts match the pattern. Just like with cutting the glass, you can use whatever technique and order you want to shape the pieces, including using a grinder, an abrading stone, or just grozing pliers. My preferred method is to lay each piece on top of the pattern template one at a time and mark any areas that need refinement. Then, I use my grinder to get the shape to match more precisely. I build out the piece on top of the pattern, refining as I go, until I'm happy with how everything fits together. When you're happy with how all your pieces fit together too, it's time to clean them. Using your preferred cleaner and the method we went over in Lesson 6, give all the glass a thorough wipe down to make sure there's no devitt-triggering debris left on it. Next, position the clean glass strips on the center of the kiln shelf, following the order of the pieces as denoted by the pattern. Place piece 10, the transparent cap, on top. Bring these pieces up to a full fuse to form them into a single, solid layer. Don't forget to write down the firing schedules you use throughout this project. As we learned in Lesson 2, it's important to keep careful track of firing schedules and project outcomes so you can make adjustments to future firings if necessary. While you're waiting for the bowl base to full fuse, you can start on step 5, making the fish. Trace and cut pattern pieces 8 and 9 from orange opal and sunflower opal. Just like with the bowl base pieces, you might need to refine them a bit to get them to match the pattern more closely. To make the fins and tails of the fish, find small scraps or pieces of frit of orange opal and sunflower opal that look fitting. And remember that you can use your grozers if you don't have pre-made frit. Part of the fun of fusing is letting the glass transform into a unique shape in the kiln, so don't worry about finding perfectly precise shapes for the fins. Whatever little bits look interesting to you will be perfect. And don't forget to find a very tiny little bit of black opal for each fish's eye. Once you've picked out just the right fishy details, set them all aside and move on to step 6, making the accent lines. These lines will be placed at the top and bottom of the bowl, marking the separation between what I envision to be the sea and the sky. To make these lines, hold the turquoise blue opal noodle along the pattern line between pieces 1 and 3, and mark where it'll need to be cut to fit along the seam. Then, as we learned how to do in Lesson 5, cut the noodle to the correct size. Just like with the sheet glass pieces, you might need to lightly refine the ends if you want them to perfectly match the curve of your bowl. When you're done with one of these noodle lines, repeat the process for the other. Since I'm a strong proponent of originality and creativity, I want to encourage you to pause at this part of the project and consider whether there are any unique details you can think of that would add to this piece. You've learned a ton of skills throughout this series, and now could be a great time to put some of them to use. For instance, maybe you want to flame bend some squiggly stringer seaweed? Or maybe you want to distinguish one of the sea strips with some interesting frit texture. Or maybe you just want to change up the accent line color. There are countless ways to make this project truly your own, so just give it some thought. After the accent lines, the fish, the bubbles, and any other details you may have added have all been created, remove the fully fused base layer from the kiln and clean it along with all these other pieces. Before moving on to the next step, take a look at your fired base layer and decide which of its sides you want to face upward, because you can use either one. Don't worry if the bottom surface has a little texture from the kiln shelf or paper. It'll smooth out during the next firing. I like my capped side a little more, so I'm going with that one. When all the pieces are clean, prep your shelf with kiln wash or paper once more, and then arrange the pieces on top of it for the next firing. One trick I use when positioning pieces like this is to measure and mark the exact center of my base layer with a very tiny marker dot. This makes it easier to place details symmetrically around that point. This is also where your tweezers and glue, if you have them, will come in handy. I'm actually going to rebuild this piece directly in my kiln because I prefer not to use glue when I don't have to, but if you want to use small dots of it to hold things together, you certainly can. Look at the pattern as a reference while you build out the details, but their positioning doesn't have to be a perfect match. Once the details are set, fire the entire piece to either a tack or contour fuse, depending on the aesthetic you'd like for the final piece. I want my details to stay fairly sharp, so I'm using this light contour firing schedule. If you want yours more rounded out, increase either the process soak temperature or the process soak hold time. If you need a refresher on adjusting schedules for different fuses, you can always revisit Lesson 2 of this series. Once the kiln has done its magic, remove your project, which I'm sure is looking awesome, by the way, return it to your work surface, and clean it once more to remove any lingering primer or paper residue. Then go on to step 10, slumping the bowl. Center the project atop your mold and elevate it within the kiln, as we learned how to do in Lesson 8. Then bring the kiln up to slumping temperature to allow the glass to take the shape of the mold. Finally, remove the slumped piece from the kiln, clean off any paper or primer residue, and admire your beautiful work. And recall from Lesson 8 that if it hasn't quite slumped to your liking, you can refire it within the mold at a higher process soak temperature or with a longer process soak hold time. Wrap things up by observing what you love about the final piece, as well as any areas you think could be better, and make notes for future reference so you can keep improving. Now, go display that lovely handiwork somewhere where it'll be appreciated. Thanks for sticking with me all the way through this series. I've had so much fun sharing my glassworking knowledge with you in a way that you've hopefully found empowering and inspiring. Although this technically was the last lesson in this series, there are actually 3 more supplementary lessons that go over tips for designing fused glass patterns, common fusing issues and their solutions, and fused glass safety. So definitely go give those a watch if you want to soak up all the glassworking knowledge you can. And finally, if you enjoyed this instructional series and found it valuable, check out more of the glassworking resources available on my website, glassworkpixie.com, and on Oceanside Glass and Tile's website, oceansidecompatible.com. You can also find lots more of our respective content through our various social media channels. Thanks for following along.